Trapped inside a small farmhouse on the outskirts of a remote Mexican village, 65 men of the French Foreign Legion held off 3,000 Mexican soldiers for over 10 hours in a desperate but defiant last stand that saw just 5 legionaries still standing by the time the defenders' ammunition ran out. This handful of weary survivors still refusing to surrender, despite knowing that victory was impossible, instead launching a hopeless bayonet charge against the enemy in the climactic finale of a battle that would see the 65-man company all but wiped out after inflicting an incredible 500 casualties on the besieging Mexican forces. In 1860, Benito Juárez became president of Mexico, following a ruinous 3-year-long civil war that left the country on the verge of bankruptcy. The massive loans Mexico had accumulated from European powers came with equally eye-watering repayments that Mexico simply could not afford. In a desperate effort to balance the nation's books, President Juárez announced a 2-year pause on debt repayments to all creditors. However, his creditors were not common backstreet loan sharks, but some of the greatest powers on the planet. Angered by this move against their financial interests, the European powers signed the Convention of London on October 31, 1861, a treaty which resulted in Great Britain, Spain and France sending a joint expeditionary force to Mexico in December, which would compel the Mexican government to repay its debts or suffer the consequences. This invasion of Mexico violated the Monroe Doctrine, a core tenet of US foreign policy that regarded any intervention by foreign powers in the Western Hemisphere as a hostile act against the United States itself. However, with the US embroiled in its own civil war, the Europeans correctly anticipated no interference from the Americans in the North. Yet despite winning several early victories and even threatening to capture the Mexican capital, the European coalition soon fell apart after nefarious French ambitions came to light. The British and Spanish withdrew their forces after learning that Napoleon III secretly intended to use the European invasion to overthrow the Mexican government and install a puppet emperor, effectively turning Mexico into a client state of the French Empire. France now stood alone in a campaign that would later become known as the Second French Intervention in Mexico. Keen to exploit this division, the Mexican army moved against the isolated French invaders, winning a decisive victory at the Battle of Puebla on May 5, 1862, halting the French advance and even threatening to completely overwhelm the foothold in Mexico. Fighting alone and with their forces heavily depleted, in early 1863, France brought in fresh reinforcements, calling upon the hardened men of the French Foreign Legion to support a planned new advance on Mexico City. The brainchild of King Louis Philippe, the Foreign Legion was created in 1831 to serve as an elite but expendable fighting force which would recruit from the large number of out-of-work foreign military veterans who had flocked to France from across Europe. With the continent reeling from a wave of failed revolutions and independence movements, thousands of veterans, revolutionaries and freedom fighters fled their homes in search of a new life in France. This large pool of discontented and out-of-work men with professional military training posed a serious potential threat to the stability of the French state. The Foreign Legion was intended to give these men work, take them off the streets, and offer them a fresh start, transforming them into a fighting force that would serve France rather than threaten it. Volunteers could enlist under an assumed name and would be eligible for French citizenship after 3 years' service, a system intended to provide criminals, wanted men and other undesirables from all over the world who had found their way to France with a new way to obtain a life free from their past transgressions, their blood and service under the French flag, effectively allowing them to wash away their sins and crimes and be reborn as Frenchmen. The Foreign Legion would prove their bravery and fighting ability time and time again, fighting for their adopted home all over the world, from the sun-scorched sands of Algeria to the mosquito-ridden jungles of Indochina, earning a well-deserved reputation as warriors who never backed down, no matter the odds. Unbeknown to a small group of legionaries arriving in Mexico in 1863, this fearsome reputation was about to be put to the ultimate test. Bolstered by reinforcements, the French once again advanced on Mexico City, However, the path to the capital was blocked by the well-defended city of Puebla. On March 16, 1863, a French army some 28,000 strong laid siege to Puebla. The city simply had to be captured before the capital could be taken. However, the French supply lines were now dangerously stretched, and the army was running low on food and armaments. To support this critically important siege, a huge supply convoy was dispatched from the French-held port of Veracruz, carrying over 3 million francs in gold bullion, 60 wagons of ammunition, and badly needed siege artillery. It was imperative that this supply column reach the French army at Puebla. However, the presence of such a valuable and tempting enemy target moving through the country did not go unnoticed by the Mexicans. French spies soon learned that a large Mexican force was planning to ambush the convoy, and military commanders scrambled to assemble a relief force to protect the approaching supply column. The task of finding and protecting the supply wagons fell to a handful of men from the French Foreign Legion, and the 3rd Company of the Legion's 2nd Battalion was dispatched. The 35-year-old Foreign Legion captain Jean d'Anjou volunteered to lead the rescue mission. D'Anjou was a battle-hardened veteran who had seen action all over the French Empire, and was easily recognizable by the wooden prosthetic he designed and wore after losing his left hand fighting rebels in Algeria. At 1 a.m. on April 30th, 1863, the 3rd Company, consisting of just 62 legionaries and 3 officers, set off to find, defend, and safely escort the supply column to the city of Puebla. Undertaking a night march to avoid the worst of the heat, the 3rd Company arrived near the meeting point at sunrise. However, the legionaries would have no chance to rest. As they brewed their morning coffee, a lookout spotted a force of 250 Mexican cavalry bearing down on the Legion's position. In response to this fast-approaching threat, Captain d'Anjou quickly ordered his men to form a hollow square. The legionaries disciplined volleys of rifle fire, successfully repulsing 2 separate Mexican cavalry charges. Having won a momentary respite, Captain d'Anjou hoped to draw the Mexican forces away from the convoy, ordering his men to fall back to an abandoned 2-story farmhouse on the outskirts of the town of Camaron. The derelict building's 3-meter stone walls providing an attractive, defensible position that the men of the Legion might be able to hold against superior numbers. However, the situation was far more dire than the captain realized. Hidden just 10 kilometers northeast of Camaron was the headquarters of a Mexican army numbering over 3,000 cavalry and infantry. After learning of the arrival of the legionaries, the Mexicans dispatched an additional force of around 2,000 men to crush the French before they could alert the supply convoy of the impending ambush. With 16 legionaries captured during the retreat, Captain d'Anjou was left with just 49 men with which to hold the farmhouse against as many as 3,000 Mexican infantry and cavalry. The defensive position he hoped would be his salvation was about to become his tomb. With the Foreign Legion completely surrounded and outnumbered by as much as 60 to 1, the Mexican colonel in charge of the siege dispatched Captain Ramon Lane to negotiate a peaceful surrender that he thought would be gratefully accepted by the trapped French forces. Pointing out the impossible situation they were in, the Mexican captain implored the legionaries to lay down their arms and avoid being needlessly slaughtered, for surely they could see that they stood absolutely no chance of victory. Yet in a seemingly insane act of defiance, Captain d'Anjou refused the offer, telling the shocked Mexicans that he had plenty of ammunition and shall continue to fight. Captain d'Anjou gathered his few remaining men and made them swear on his wooden hand that they would fight to the death rather than surrender, the defiant group sharing a last bottle of wine together as they prepared to face the hell that was to come. Yet while such a defiant last stand might appear foolish and wasteful, there was tactical logic to Captain d'Anjou's decision. The Mexicans possessed no artillery with which to break down the farm's walls, defenses that made their cavalry almost useless, and any frontal attack by infantry would be costly indeed. D'Anjou believed that his small group of legionaries might be able to hold off the enemy until reinforcements arrived, or perhaps even until the Mexicans gave up and went home. However, if this battle was to be his last, he was determined to make the enemy pay a steep price in blood. With their patience exhausted, the Mexicans attacked, unleashing a withering storm of thousands of bullets towards the farmhouse, the legionaries inside barely able to move without being killed. At around 11 AM, the Mexicans charged the western and southern sides of the building, and although they were repulsed with massive casualties, Captain d'Anjou was killed in the struggle. Command of the beleaguered men now fell to 2nd Lieutenant Napoleon Villain. The Mexicans offered the French a second chance to surrender, however once again they were refused. The legionaries were determined to fight on no matter the cost. As the afternoon wore on, casualties on both sides mounted, the burning sun coupled with a lack of drinking water, sapping the defenders' energy with each passing minute. 4 hours into the battle, just 32 legionaries were still standing. By 2 PM only 20 remained, and at 2:30 PM, Lieutenant Napoleon Villain joined the growing ranks of the dead. Command now passed to 2nd Lieutenant Clement Mordet, the sole surviving officer. Frustrated by the sheer tenacity and stubbornness of the legionaries, at 5 PM the Mexicans set fire to several bales of hay, the thick, choking smoke they produced, filling the farmhouse and forcing the 12 Legion defenders still alive to abandon the main building and barricade themselves in the nearby stable. From here they continued their heroic but doomed resistance, and by the time their ammunition finally ran out at 6 PM, just 5 legionaries were still alive. Colonel Milan gave the tiny band of survivors a third and final opportunity to surrender. However, the men once again refused, determined to fulfill their vow to the fallen Captain d'Anjou and fight on to the bitter end. The 5 legionaries fired the last remaining bullet from their rifles and mounted a final bayonet charge at the enemy. As they rushed forward, 2 men were immediately cut down as the Mexicans opened fire, with 1 legionary struck by 19 bullets. Undeterred, the 3 survivors leapt over the corpses of their fallen comrades and prepared to charge one last time. However, they were by now already surrounded by dozens of Mexican soldiers holding their bayonets pointed forward, ready to strike. With dozens of bayonets pointed at their chests, the 3 men prepared for death. However, perhaps moved by the incredible courage his enemy had shown, the Mexican officer in charge ordered his men to hold and gave the defeated 3 legionaries yet another chance to lay down their arms and live. Despite being in no position to negotiate, the legionaries agreed on the condition that they be allowed to keep their weapons and equipment and have any of their wounded still alive treated. A request which was immediately accepted as the Mexicans brought out stretchers and escorted the men away. As his newly captured Legion prisoners approached, the victorious Mexican Colonel Milan was shocked that just 2 of his enemy remained, reportedly saying, "These are not men, they are demons." It's not hard to see why this was his reaction. Just 65 legionaries had held off 3,000 Mexicans for 9 hours, killing 190 and wounding over 300. By the time the battle was over, 43 legionaries were dead and 20 were wounded, with just 2 still standing. Their dramatic last stand at a remote Mexican village cemented the Legion's global reputation as an elite fighting force, and the anniversary of the battle is still marked by the Legion each year on April 30th. A ceremony which sees the reappearance of the fallen Captain Jean d'Anjou's wooden hand, which is still venerated as a relic of war. The supply convoy the legionaries died defending successfully escaped and safely made it to Puebla, helping the French to finally capture Mexico City and install Ferdinand Maximilian as emperor. However, the French puppet's rule would be short-lived. After the new emperor failed to win over his people, Mexico was once again plunged into civil war, and French troops were forced to combat uprisings all over the country. Added pressure from the newly unified United States following the end of the American Civil War made the French position untenable, and in May 1866, Emperor Napoleon III withdrew all French forces from Mexico. Without backing from France, Emperor Maximilian was quickly deposed in 1867, and after being convicted of treason, was executed by firing squad. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you again soon.